So if you aren't familiar with How to Be Adopted, we've been going for about 4 years, and I'm Claire, and I started the organisation as a kind of reaction to finding an absence of adoptee voices and experiences out there. So we've been hoping to try and sort of fill that void, as it were. And we have both Lara and Jilly now on the team. Yeah, a bit about me, because people always ask. So I'm a domestic UK adoptee, adopted in the late 70s, early 80s. Yeah, and I've just been really lucky through How to Be Adopted to meet so many of you, both in real life and virtually. So thank you to you all for so much support. It really does mean a lot to us. So I'm going to hand over to Lara to introduce herself, and then we'll pass over to Jilly.
Hi everyone, I'm Lara, and for those of you who weren't at our first webinar in March, I am also a domestic adoptee. I was adopted by private adoption in 1970, and very briefly also sort of came into this through a similar route, I think, as many of us, through my own struggles and not really having sort of anywhere to turn or kind of express some of those feelings, or to feel part of a community, which is really, I think, one of the most amazing things about this, really, but as well as the learning and all the new things that are coming out of it. But my own journey and particular struggles sort of led me into therapy. So I'm an existential therapist, and as part of my master's degree, I also did some research. And so it's brilliant to see all of this research coming out now, because, you know, there wasn't enough. People don't know enough about this. The layperson doesn't expect that these things that we are now finding out to be the case. And so it's amazing to be part of something that's re-educating everybody out there, as well as providing support for all of us that sorely need it and needed it and will need it going forward. So it's amazing to be part of that, and I'm super excited to hear Jilly's research, having sort of read it myself, but to hear the sort of the ins and outs of it, and I'm sure you'll all take great value from it. So before I hand over to Jilly, just very quick reminder of some dates for your diaries. June 17th is our adoptee gathering, 3 hours, very informal. It's an online event, so put that one down in your diaries. The links to book these are on the website, the How to Be Adopted website, under the events tab. That's, I believe, 10 till 1 on the 17th of June. The agenda is still to be finalised, but we've got some really nice things that we're planning on doing for that event. And then, of course, 15th of October, National Adoption Week, but we are planning our own in-person gathering, another lovely informal, but an in-person get-together in London on the 15th of October to coincide with National Adoption Week. Again, more details will be coming out as we move sort of closer to the date, but bookings for the events can be done via the website under the, as I say, under the events tab. Keep your eyes peeled for emails and updates about those events. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jilly, and let's look forward to hearing everything about what she has to say.
Hello. I'm hoping you can all hear me now. Give us a nod, Lara.
Yeah,
yeah, great. Okay,
yeah.
There we are. So good evening, everybody. It's a lovely sunny evening here in Cheshire. Can you believe it's normally raining? So yeah, my name's Jilly. Similarly, I'm a domestic adoption, 1962. I'm 60 this year. I can't believe I'm 60 next month. So how on earth did I get this far? So yes, similarly, struggles with adoption, and came late to even admitting that adoption was an issue. I think I was probably in denial at least till I was 46. You know, doing the I'm fine, everybody else is weird, not me, which was my coping strategy. And eventually came to the conclusions that, you know, I needed to find birth family, I needed to deal with this stuff. And yeah, similarly to Lara, came to want to be a therapist to help others, which I'm now 1 month off qualifying to being an integrative counsellor. So that'll be fantastic. I'm looking forward to doing as much as I can really to help other adoptees, particularly younger people, and to have a little bit of input and support for adopting parents too, to sort of, if they can learn from our stories, that will be all the better as well. So I've been working as a training consultant and a coach for 30 years really, but I'm going to be switching to psychotherapy and counselling very soon. So as part of the counselling course, I don't know, perhaps if you're all aware, that one of the units or the modules that you have to do is you have to do a research project, and you have to actually conduct some research. And people were doing almost kind of making up topics just to sort of fill the qualification. But I thought, right, I'm going to do something really useful and really juicy with this unit that I've got to do. And bizarrely, while this was happening, I broke my foot. So I had 3 months with a broken foot to just get stuck in and do nothing but focus on this. So it was kind of handy, really. Whilst I wouldn't wish a broken foot on anybody, it was a great opportunity to really focus and not be distracted and gather all this stuff together. So that's how the research project came about. It was something I had to do, but happy happenstance that it all happened in the way that it did. So the research project took about 3 months from start to finish before we got all the results in. So the presentation I'll share talks us through not only the research results, but the process. And I want to share what I asked adoptees and the kind of responses that we got. So do feel free to scribble down any questions and we'll take those at the end, I guess. We'll see how we go for time. So without further ado, I will just screen share the presentation. There we go. Let's click on that. Here we go. Okie dokie. So the study is called The Biopsychosocial Impacts of Adoption in Adults. And so I'm sharing this, of course, on behalf of howtobeadopted.com. So let's go through. So my thinking was initially that adoption is a really much studied field. When I started to look at the research that was out there, there was tons, but mostly about children. And so this first section here, where it is known to be disruptive or very difficult for children, and most of the research out there was about the impacts on children and early adoption. So much less was known about the long-term impacts of adoption that followed on into mature adulthood. It was as if sort of, once people weren't children anymore, they were forgotten about. We were particularly interested in this because of current provision of support for adoptees pretty much stops at 21. It's kind of like, you're a grown up now, off you go, ka-ching. In small pockets and particular circumstances, I believe you can get support up to the age of 25, but largely it's 21 and you're all done. You're deemed to be an adult and free to go kind of thing. And of course, what we know is that for a lot of people, they don't even start to register the impacts of adoption in their 20s. We're too busy out there, aren't we? We're partying, we're at uni, or we're getting first jobs, and we're not even recognizing that adoption's been an impact. Many people, even into the 30s, 40s, 50s, before they start to think, I wonder if my life difficulties are to do with adoption. This was my message in particular. So, hang on. So in particular, I wanted to hear the perspective from adoptees, but who were now adults. We get it that, children are going to find it difficult. I was interested in how many grown-ups who were adopted had suffered in the way I did. And so that's how that came about. So, okie doke. So the structure that I'm going to talk through is the first topic will be about the changing field of adoption and how it's morphed and changed into the position we're in now. A little bit about the existing research that I did find, that there was some out there. Then I'm going to chat about my rationale and the hypothesis that I proposed and put forward. Oh, and by the way, that hypothesis was agreed by Stockport College, which is a centre of excellence for integrative counselling therapy. Then we'll look at the design and the procedure and how we went about it, and then we'll look at the results and some discussion points there. And then there's going to be a bit of a conclusion and summary with my thoughts, and naturally your thoughts are all welcome too, because it's kind of where do we go from here? So any thoughts you have on that would be brilliant. So if you want to take notes as we're going along, please do. Okay, so when I started to look at pictures of adoption, I thought I'll just get some images. And here were these lovely jolly shots of a jolly family and a heart with all the words to do with adoption in. And I thought, is that necessarily representative? So the first thing I had a look at was this, an article actually by John Simmons of Coram, an adoption support organisation. And it was about 4 decades of adoption. And this gentleman pointed out that actually, in the 50s, there was adoption and it grew through the 60s, and growing and growing until it peaked in 1968 with 25,000 adoptions that year. Wow, that's just an incredible amount. But look at this, by 1973, we're down to 5,000. So no prizes for, guessing what that was about. We know that, the pill really didn't come into its own until the early 70s. And by 1973, the effects of the birth control were starting to be felt, because only 5,000 babies were up for adoption then. And that was largely babies in those days. We know that's changed now. So adoption peaks in 1968, and then it started, in terms of babies, it started to drop ever since. So then what happens is, you've got this situation in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and into the 1980s, where adoption was very much perceived as the ideal solution for a society that had pregnant ladies here and unwanted babies, or babies that couldn't be cared for, whether they wanted or not, and people wanting to adopt who couldn't have children. So, happy days, look, we'll slot these guys together, off we go, everybody's happy, job done, was very much the kind of idea of it. It's the ideal solution for society, everybody's happy. And now we're kind of starting to realise that maybe that's not the case. As we moved from the 80s and moving on now into today, adoption seems to be much more about providing permanence for children in care. So that sort of the unwanted pregnancy thing is still there, but less. Many more younger children and infants coming into adoption now, from not only from birth, but for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and onwards, and maybe morphing from foster care into adoption. So the picture's changed, and we know that that's got a very different aspect in terms of further trauma. So that's where we've sort of come from, if you like, with adoption. So I'm just going to have to put my little glasses on to make sure I've not missed anything. No, right, okay, no, off we go. So the existing research I found, there was lots, mostly in America, lots of research about adopting in particular related to something like alcoholism. Then we had adoption linked to drug use. Then we had adoption linked to attainment and qualifications. And so there were lots of sort of these links that were being connected, but nothing about the whole piece, and certainly nothing into old age. Certainly nothing that was any lasting or across the scope. They looked at quite narrow aspects. And I've got this little picture at the bottom here, these little babies, which was about, where have we gone? There we are, this little picture at the bottom. Lots of study between nature and nurture. Adoption was used as a great way of studying how much of an infant's development was to do with nature and how much was to do with nurture. So there are lots and lots of studies about that compared, and lots of use of twins. There were studies on twins, and to see one was adopted and one that was kept with the birth family and what had happened. And there were quite a lot of twin studies to see how nature versus nurture had an impact. But I think the one that was the nearest to what I wanted to find out was this 7 lifelong impacts of adoption. This was carried out in 1982 by Silverstein and Kaplan. If you want to Google it, do, because they have at least a full page, if not a few pages, about each of these 7 lifelong impacts. So it's easily to find. So do check it out if you wish to, because there's much more than that I'm going to share this evening of their work. So it was Silverstein and Kaplan with a K, and they did this research in 1982. So I'll share their 7 lifelong impacts that they found. Firstly, which kind of relates to this picture there with the hole in the heart, was loss. A life-altering loss with no end, resulting in potential threat of future loss, having a profound impact. So this was, to chat about that a little bit, was about a kind of a hole, a sense of a void, a sense of something missing, and that once people who were close had been collected and attachments formed, the potential threat of losing that was really overwhelming, and profound. That was linked to a profound sense of grief. But this grief, because it had happened so early, hadn't been released, hadn't been expressed. And so it had often been held back, pushed down, stored in the body, where it lingered, having an effect. That was, because it had always been there, was largely subconscious, just feeling a bit weird, but different to everybody else, but not knowing why. These two lead to rejection being quite an issue, and a heightened sensitivity around any hint of rejection for adoptees. So they were the first 3. Followed by this number 4, a sense of either guilt or shame around having been rejected. Because certainly there must be something wrong with me. I mustn't have been good enough if I had to be given away. And I've heard other speakers on adoption talk about, I was my real self, I was my authentic, open, loving self, and I was given away. And it doesn't matter how old we were when that occurred, whether we were 1 day old or 5 years old, that sense still seems to be happening, this sense of guilt or shame. There's a, if you like, how we internalize the message was this sense of, mustn't it be good enough then? It must be me, must be me. Then we get an identity issue, with a lot of adoptees reporting a little sense of where they belong, having little sense of where they belong. I called it personally having a fractured identity. I'm this person, but I'm also not, I'm also somebody else. And yeah, very much a confusion around who I am, who I belong to, which family am I actually from, and that being confusing. Then that leads to, in later life, intimacy becoming an issue, where there are real fears about any other future loss of intimate connection. So relationships being difficult, love relationships being difficult, and even close friendship being difficult. How, it's very difficult to let people in, because what if you reject me and I'm rejected again? So that was shown to be quite an issue. And finally, as a result of all that, we get this issue around mastery and control, with a strong sense of needs for autonomy, needing to be in control, not wanting to be control, lots of self-employment, lots of, I'm just need to survive myself. I don't want to be controlled by work or by others. So those were their 7 lifelong impacts of adoption. And as I say, there are pages on each of those that I've just touched upon very lightly. So I don't know about you, but I read this list as a kind of, just something I was reading and a bunch of facts and loss, grief, right? Yeah, rejection, okay, identity, and kind of just read it as a list without thinking, do I have that? Does that land for me? Is that me? And for a long time I was thinking, nah, until I started to really take down the barriers and think, do you know what? Yeah, there has been a sense of grief. That's the void I have never been able to put my finger on, and loss, yes. And I think the one that was least resonant for me was the guilt and shame one, because of the message I was given by my parents, how much they'd wanted me. So I think that kind of overwrote that one, but certainly all the rest, I could identify with myself. But I felt we could do a more thorough job even though this was amazing research, and it was the first time that this was acknowledged and this has been used and referred to. And indeed, this research started to inform policy. It started to be noted by adoption agencies and taken notice of. And that's when, we got the advent of kind of keep in touch policies and the letterbox system that came out of this research. So they did us a great job in trying to improve the adoption experience after that. So I wanted to kind of just get into a bit more meat than that did. So I'll carry on a little bit more. My rationale then, and my hypothesis was that the impacts of adoption continue long after the age of 21 when all the support stops. That, we don't just hit 21 and get the key to the door and suddenly adoption is not an issue anymore. I suspected that there may be two types of adoptee. Those who have really little impact, that seem to not be affected by it very much, and those with high impact. I suspected there was a range of difficulties because as we discussed things in forums, we were talking about things in howtobeadopted.com and in some of the meetings I'd attended and recovery groups I've been in with other adoptees, was that actually people talked about all sorts of things that were physical, emotional, mental, habits, patterns, behaviours. I thought there's more to this, there's even more to this. So I wanted to do quantitative and qualitative research. So by quantitative, I'm talking about collecting data, facts, figures, numbers, and qualitative research being much more about feelings and people's experience and their stories, where people could actually share and be a bit more using the other side of the brain, the way we're sort of left for logic, right for creativity and emotion. So I thought, well, let's tap into both sides of the brain then. Let's get the factual, logical, hard facts down there, but also let's get people's stories. And that was very moving because that really did show us some different kinds of responses. Okay. So, oh, wait a minute. Sorry, going the wrong way. Why is it going backwards? Tell you what, we'll hit another button. Let's do this. There we are. I've gone the wrong way. So my hypothesis was there is a need for lifelong support for a significant number of adoptees. And even though mine was quite a small study, it did kind of show that many impacts of adoption were kind of subtle, really, and hidden and not maybe attributed, to actually being around adoption. And I also suspected that some differences would show up between the adoption point, the stage of life at which people were adopted, that gender may play a part, and that age groups might show different kind of levels of impact. So these are some of the things that I wanted to hunt around and find out, just to see about, let's get a bit more about what happens when you hand over a baby to some other people. So that's where I was coming from. Okie dokie. So, no, I'm going to show you that bit in a minute. Right, let me just go on a slide. So how we set about it was identified a way of creating some figures and some data from questionnaires with a sliding scale, which I'll show you. And after each section, we looked at the qualitative methods, which was actually getting people to tell their story. And that could have been a sentence, it could have been a paragraph. Some people wrote pages. So we really did get feelings as well. So we got the feeling centre and the rational centre. 34 adoptees were approached, and they were from these different age groups: 21 to 35, 35 to 55, 55 to 65, and 65 plus. Because in quite a few of the adoptive forums I've been on, that we did have, which was great, some older people as well. So that was brilliant. And I put them into two groups. Group one was people who had no engagement with adoptee support groups at all. They'd never joined a support group, they didn't feel they needed one, or they'd never heard of one, but either way, they weren't as part of a support group. And group two were people who do engage with adoptee support groups. So that might be howtobeadopted.com, it might have been the Adoption UK's Welsh group, other groups, it might have been groups that happen abroad, quite a lot of groups in America. There's a group in Scotland. So some people had sought out groups and were actively engaged and some people weren't. And I wanted to explore what that difference was about, you know, or was it just that people didn't know about them? That was another line of inquiry. Okay, so the questionnaire then was based on something called the biopsychosocial model. And this is a model used often in mental health, in assessing people, and it as the word chunks down, really. The bio relates to the biological impacts on the person, the physical, the somatic experience. How do people feel this in their bodies? What's happening physically, you know, around this condition, if we want to call it that. The psycho relates to the psychological, and that might be habits, it might be patterns, it might be mental habits, which of course drives behaviours and actions as well. And finally, the social part is about the socio-relational and the emotional side of the person. So this is also how we affect our interactions with others. And each question was scored on a sliding scale from a centre point, which I'm going to show you how it was done in a moment. Are we on this now? Yeah, we are. So the biological section, these were the questions I asked. I asked around sleep patterns, how well people slept, physical tension, and I was talking about, were we aware of anywhere in the body where tension was held? Separate to anxiety, did people notice themselves as being anxious in their body, and where did they notice that? Because quite a lot of people held tension up here in the upper body or in their legs as part of that kind of fight-flight response. So there's a holding of physical tension, but anxiety tends to be much more in the tummy, you know, sort of down the middle or the core of our bodies. I wanted to find out how the body coped, and if people were anything from just overdoing it a bit, so which might be overeating, drinking a little bit too much, you know, doing a bit too much with the cigarettes or recreational drugs, right through up to addiction. So, you know, where people put themselves there, were they not overdoing it at all? Were they overdoing it a bit, or was it full on, you know, addictions that people had experienced with substances or activities? And that can be anything. That might be, you know, obsessive shopping, you know, gambling, you know, it could be any kind of addictive or compulsive behaviour or action, right up to the use of substances as well. I wanted to find out about energy levels. There was something about adrenal fatigue and people having anxiety in the body, very much suffering from fatigue as life went along, because the adrenal glands got exhausted. So I was interested in finding out about that. And quite a lot of people reported things like having digestion and food processing issues. So with things like IBS, you know, these kind of conditions that were happening. And there were loads more that I wanted to ask about. I had thoughts about asking about breathing and, you know, and skin conditions, itching and, you know, psoriasis and skin conditions, stuff like that. But to be honest, the questionnaire got really big and I didn't want to overwhelm people, you know, because it's going to be like, they're going to be, you know, having to spend hours at this. So I did need to kind of keep the questions down, but there were more physical questions I could have included, I know, and maybe, you know, we can discuss that later. Okay, so the next up are the psychological questions. So I asked about happiness versus depression, and again, that was shown as a scale. Thought patterns, you know, how were we managing our thought patterns? What kind of thought patterns were people experiencing? How people masked their own pain. What were they doing? Was kind of some denial going on? Whether people engaged in overanalyzing as a result of anxiety, did people overanalyze, overthink things, worry, these kind of things, you know, patterns and habits. Was there a sense of aloneness and loneliness? I wanted to find out about that. So those were questions, and really how people sat in the world. You know, what was their worldview? Were they comfortable in the world, or were they really quite not? Then this was kind of behaviours and actions. It had been put to me that often adoptees are drawn to hobbies or activities that are adrenalizing, you know, things that are a bit dangerous, like bungee jumping and, you know, extreme ironing and stuff like that. So I wanted to find out, you know, are people drawn to risky stuff Do they push themselves? Do they push themselves to have adventures that are adrenalizing? Because that's a normal state. You know, if you're kind of anxious, feeling adrenalized is pretty much a normal state. Similarly with occupations, quite a lot of reports of adoptees doing dangerous jobs. They might do jobs like bomb disposal or be in the military, you know, or do stuff that scared them. And when I thought about it, I thought, well, my job was pretty scary, because when I was, you know, training consultant and presenter, I would be, you know, dealing with audiences of hundreds. And I trained abroad. I worked in Holland and Greece and Germany, and those experiences were really adrenalizing, but I did them anyway. You know, and it was kind of that buzz of being alive. So there was lots of reports of adoptees, you know, taking up jobs that were risky. It might be, you know, the fireman or, you know, ambulance driver, but things that were adrenalizing, that sort of made people feel adrenalized and therefore normal or alive. Finally, something about changing location. Quite a few people reported that they wanted to move away from where they'd been living as an adoptee. Patterns of order and control, how people feel about that. Did people strive for autonomy and order and control, or was that just me? So I wanted to find out about that. Modern survival issues. What I mean by this is how we set about surviving. Did we, for example, squirrel money away? You know, were we good savers? Were we very much on for getting our own house and getting it owned and feeling safe in the world? So that's what I mean by model survival issues. You know, did we strive to survive? You know, get good jobs, study hard, you know, I'm going to look after myself, that kind of approach. And even though this hadn't been something for me, how had parenting been for adoptees? You know, what kind of parents did they feel they were going to be or were? Then we talked about seeking out ways to feel okay. Well, I wanted to know what people were doing in order to make themselves feel all right. How did they go about that? Had people sought therapy or counselling? The extent to which adoption was discussed at home, so within the adoptive family, was it a taboo subject? Was it brushed under the carpet? Was it like in my family where we don't talk about that, we pretend it didn't happen, you know, we pretend we're just a normal family, or was it talked about? And then out there in the world, was adoption a secrecy? Was it something that we were open about, or was it something we withheld and didn't tell anyone but, you know, a favoured few? And to what extent did people seek out other adoptees, you know, and seek out to discuss, as in joining groups and stuff like that? Okay. And the last bunch of questions were about the social emotional relationship. And I asked questions around feeling insecure in relationships, having an ability to express feelings authentically or holding back from being authentic in case of rejection. You know, was there a need to kind of, if you like, people please and close down our own feelings? Was there a need to prove our own worth? Did we try hard? Did we, you know, help others a lot? Did we, you know, feel we had to bring a lot to the party in order to be worth it? Were people drawn to certain types of romantic partners, i.e. those that were maybe avoidant or would be pushing us away? Were we comfortable being attached, or were we more comfortable being single? What was happening there? And whether relationships were experienced as a source of ease or a source of stress. Because I had a feeling that for a lot of adoptees, relationships had been a source of stress. Okay. And finally, I wanted to ask about, were people healthily relating or unhealthily relating? So was there patterns of codependency, you know, or were people in kind of abusive relationships, or what kind of relating was happening? Were people experiencing relationship push and pull? You know, that whole, oh yes, please be with me, please. Oh, no, go away. Oh, please come. And how much push and pull was happening? What were responses like to new people in our world? So if somebody new joins a friendship group, or, you know, new people start at work, or how do we respond to new people? And feelings about ourselves in the world. And finally, that sense of identity. So those are the questions. So there's quite a few questions, as you can see there. I could have asked double, but as I say, I felt that that was enough questions for one survey. Thank you very much. This is an example of how the questions were laid out. This was the question about digestion issues. So they were all worded in this way, the extent to which, yeah, so you could see that whether they were on one side of the scale or the other. So on this example, to the left-hand side, we've got, I have no issues with digestion and or food processing beyond occasional bad food experiences, the odd dodgy prawn. And on the right-hand side, we had digestive issues or food intolerances. Let me just see what it says here. Leaky gut or IBS have been a part of my life, and people would work outwards from that centre zero. So in the middle, there's a zero, and people were scoring themselves, working out towards each end of the scale. So they had an option to say, this isn't me at all, or yeah, this really is me. So if they were a +5, it was, yes, I've got raging IBS. So that's how the questions were set out. So everybody got a pack with a consent form and their personal details and the usual way of conducting research with a unique participant number. And they had 6 weeks to, return that back. And responses were plotted onto a chart, and they were analysed via age group, gender, engagement within a group or not, and adoption point. So they were really sort of quite thoroughly cross-referenced, I guess. Quantitative scores were reported in a table, and qualitative responses were copied and put into a separate section so that we could literally have 2 parts to it. Tonight, I'm only going to report on the quantitative because some people did understand that this was research and it would be out there, but some people didn't. Okay, so this really boring table to look at shows you how the results came in. So across the top there, we've got age groups, genders. You'll see there were more women than men. The age people have been adopted at, so 0 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months, after 12 months. The impact on their scales from the questionnaire, and then actually how that mapped out on terms of where people were they low impact, medium or high impact. So I'm hoping you can all see on the screen, but on the right-hand column, the blue group at the top, that's the people who didn't engage with an adoptee forum group. The people in yellow at the bottom were the people in adoptee groups. And you'll notice the top group were a mixture of low, medium impact, low impact, medium impact, low. Even though in there, you've still got 2 at the bottom that were high impact, even in that group. But the group that did engage with adoptee groups, many more in the high range there. Yeah, so pretty much the majority in high in that. So how it panned out then was that we came to identify 3 groups. There were 3 groups of respondents, which were low, 6 people in the study were low, medium impact, we had 4, and high impact, we had 10. This was all the people that completed the questionnaire. So this kind of tallies to some other research I found out about, which was by a lady called Julie Selwyn. And she goes researching adoptions and how they're panning out. And she found in her research that, this was people still in their adopted families, that 1/3 were in crisis and 1/3 were struggling and 1/3 were doing well. So it's similar. She had 3 categories. I've got 3 categories, and pretty much similar, I guess. So it seems that that's how it pans out. So this is the findings from impact linked to adoption point. So the colour key here is red is high impact, blue is medium impact, and yellow is the low impact group. So we can see then, this was a surprise to me. I really thought, that it would be the way around, but no, the people that were adopted after 12 months showed much more impact, along with the medium, the 6 to 12 months. And it was the ones who were adopted 0 to 6 months who seemed to fare the best. So that was a surprise to me. I don't know why, but so there we go. That's the adoption point and the relevance that had in the impact of adoption. This was about group engagement. I thought this would be really significant, but actually it was less than I thought. And again, the same colours apply. So the people who engage with adoptee support groups, 80% were high impact people, 20% were low impact. And those not involved in an adoptee support group, still quite significant, 20% were high impact and 40% of low and medium impact. So, we've got to ask about medium impact as well. The other thing that occurred to me was, what do we mean by low impact? Because even within low impact, you know, you've got a range there, haven't you, from none to some. And there were quite a few people who reported low impact that I knew personally. And I thought, I wasn't sure whether they were maybe just still in the fog. You know, people that were, you know, certainly overeaters that were still reporting as low impact. So, you know, you don't know, there might be a bit of denial in there. Okay, so impact of adoption linked to age group. Now, this was my surprise, really was. I thought that things were bound to have been getting better over time, that surely, you know, things have got better and better for adoptees over the years, so that the older group would be the worst affected. But as you can see, it's the opposite. The people who were, you know, the 65 to 80 age group were all, you know, pretty much low. The 55 to 65, there was a mixture, no mediums, low and high. The 35 to 55s, you know, we're getting into many more high and medium range impacts, but the 21 to 35-year-olds had the highest level of high impact. So maybe that says something about the age at which people are being adopted. They're not babies anymore. You know, they're infants and into childhood before they're getting adopted, which of course would make the impact stronger. So that's how it panned out, linked to adoption point. And gender, not as cut and dried as I might have thought. Yes, females did report higher impact. You can see there's a higher red on the female score there, but you know, there were still some high and medium impacts reported by males. And again, we might wonder about, are females more likely to be open and about their emotional responses? You know, who's to say, but that's how it came out. That there were high, medium and low scores in each gender. And there were more women in the survey as well. Okay, this is the big one. This is the, I guess this is the whole point of this presentation. This is the summary of the top 5 for the whole sample. So in terms of the bio, psycho, social. So the physical impacts there, you can see the top one was substances or processes used as a comfort. So processes might stuff like, you know, over shopping, over gambling, overworking, even, you know, compulsive behaviours in any way, shape or form. Sleep issues was second. Experience of energy or fatigue, you know, fatigue was way up there as third. Question 4 had been about, are you restless or are you relaxed? And restless came up 4th. And 5th, anxiety held in the body. So those were the top 5 physical reports. Social, emotional and relational. Self-worth and self-esteem were the biggest problem. Then relationship push and pull, wanting to be close, wanting to not. Insecurity, number 3. And, you know, our ability to express ourselves authentically was a big impact at level 4. So in other words, people didn't feel or find it easy to express themselves authentically. And relationships as a source of stress was the 5th one. You know, it not being easy to have romantic relationships and them all being quite stressful, actually. And in terms of the mental psychological patterns, order and control came top, you know, people really feeling they needed to be having some sense of order, a sense of aloneness, difficulty talking about adoption, negative thought patterns and over-analysing things. So there we've got the top 15 impacts as reported by this study. And I'm just going to maybe give you a second to pause and maybe think about if any of those apply to any of you that are listening. There's quite a lot to take in one go. So at the other end of the scale, we had the minus scores, and these were things that people really didn't say as much, but did report some. Even though this was the lower end, people did still report digestion and food processing issues, feeling restless, having physical tension, sleep issues and fatigue. Some people reported, you know, feeling it, you know, actually much easier to be single and not needing to attach. Responses to new people, feeling, you know, people were guarded, that was up there. Self-worth and self-esteem, having that sense of identity issue, and relationships as a source of stress was still there at that end. Adrenalizing activities or hobbies, yeah, that was there. You know, people were into getting adrenalized, whether that's going to watch a scary film or, you know, working in bomb disposal. Changing location was up there. Openness and secrecy about our own adoption. Occupations involving risk, sorry, that was there. And this sense of aloneness again. So really quite reporting across the board. By group, this was how it came out. So physical impacts. So the blue group again are the people who don't go to adoption support groups, but they reported substances or processes as comfort. So food, drink, drugs, shopping, gambling, overworking, all that stuff. Issues with sleep, experience of fatigue, low energy levels. And in the group that do attend adoptee groups, top of the shop, again, substance or processes as a comfort. So that's come up twice, you know, as the top score. People overdoing stuff, whether that's work or anything else. And feeling restless and having an experience of energy levels that were actually fatigued. Psychological in the groups, the non-group attendees were still overanalyzing things, had negative thought patterns, and had used counselling and therapy. And this is, you know, the group that don't attend any meetings. Within the attendees, there were order and control, sense of aloneness, and difficulty in talking about adoption. And lastly, the social emotional, needing to prove own worth. This was about, you know, having to be good value, feeling that you've got to bring more to the party than just oneself. Feelings of insecurity, relationship push and pull, that shows up again in the yellow group. Feelings of insecurity again, and expressing feelings authentically was a problem for them as well. So lots of impacts overlapping to an extent. Okay, so there's a lot of information there, isn't there? And, you know, we could re-question all of those if we wanted to. But the main findings then, in conclusion and summary, were that adoption is complex. 3 levels were revealed, but I could easily have created 5 actually. The age group, the impacts were a surprise because rather than getting better, it seems to be getting worse in terms of the impact. Gender impacts reporting was, as expected, slightly more in women. Engagement with an adoptee support community meant little in terms of the actual results that we got. I think it was just about people not knowing they were around or not having found one. The adoption point was very significant, but not exclusive in terms of impact. I felt that the biopsychosocial model worked well as a structure, you know, and on the life impacts. And it, you know, my feeling was that it revealed more than other research had in terms of detail. And participants wanted to share their story. People wrote a lot, and the feelings that poured out were very strong, and people feeling quite alone and sad and insecure, and, you know, lots of negative stories. And 5 people came in with their stories after the deadline. You know, I couldn't include them, but, you know, they'd somehow missed the deadline and still wanted to share their stories. And so my conclusion is really that much more research is needed into what creates the high and the low impact or the medium impact. Why is that? Why are some adoptions creating low impact? Why are some creating medium and high impact? And I suspect I have a clue as to the answer about that. And that's going to be my next piece of reading and research that I want to do, is what makes the difference? Why are some adoptees having, you know, this feeling in crisis as reported by Julie Selwyn, you know, or really struggling? And why are some doing quite well? You know, as regards to the findings we found here, you know, what's going on? Because actually, if we can work that out, we can make a difference to adoptees going forward. You know, what do we need to share with adopting parents to make sure that the impacts start to become many more in the low end, rather than what we're seeing right now, which pans out roughly into thirds of low impact, medium impact, high impact, and ties in very nicely with what Julie Selwyn found in her study of, you know, adoptee families. So that's the research thus far. And as you can see, I think I'm very much thinking about encouraging more and more, if possible, because we need to find out more about this stuff. You know, we need more detail. I actually had double the amount of questions I wanted to ask, but didn't, because I didn't want people to have to spend, you know, days filling in the blooming thing. But the responses were conclusive, I felt. And, you know, if this was on a much bigger scale, we could really start to nail it. We could really start to find out what makes those differences. So that's a sort of potted version of my research, and I'm mindful of time now. So I'm going to hand back to Claire, and we can see if there's anything we need to discuss from here. So I'll just spend a minute unsharing this. Let's stop share. There we go. Hope that wasn't too lengthy for you all. I could have talked much longer, actually.
Thank you so much, Jilly. That was amazing. And yeah, I wish I could. Big hug, because I absolutely loved it. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
We had some really excellent questions and comments coming in. The chat was on fire throughout. So we're going to be wading through those. Please keep them coming. And obviously, we apologize in advance if we don't get to everybody. We will do our very, very best. What I'm going to do is, while we're just having a look through and prioritizing the questions, we've prepared a short poll, and to be honest, it's not going to be used for anything. So please don't worry. It's not scientifically rigorous. It's just something a little bit interactive that I'm just going to pop up while we're having a look at the questions. So it should have appeared. If it hasn't, please let me know. And this is just for the adopted people on the call. So if you're not adopted, please don't take part. And feel free, if you don't want to participate, that is fine too. Thank you. So that's our first time trying a poll. So yeah, feedback welcome. So keep the questions coming, as I said. And I've got a few just to ask Jilly about the way that it was conducted. So we've got a couple of questions. I'll just go through them just in no particular order. Did you, when you were taking the demographics, did you ask whether people were an only child in the family they grew up in, or whether they had siblings? It's not a criticism, it's just that people were curious if that was included. No worries. And do you have a theory on that, whether there would be higher or lower impacts, or would it completely depend on the type of the family?
I guess it would depend on whether there was all the siblings were adopted, or if there was a combination of, you know, non-adopted and adopted siblings. I think that would have an impact. And I think it would have helped me. I think I would have fared better if there'd been a sibling, because as it was, as an only one, you know, it felt pretty lonely, really. And I think I would have fared better had I had another adopted sibling to share that experience with. So yeah, as I say, it was just, I think that was one of my early questions, and then I had to sift it out.
Yeah, no worries at all. People feel free to put in the chat if it was relevant to you. You think you're the sibling or only child dynamic. And we've had one about whether you included race in your questions, and to add to that, whether they were domestically adopted or an inter-country adoption. No. This is all good stuff for future research, isn't it? And I know from the comments we've got some other researchers with us, and Lara herself is also a researcher. So yeah, lots more research to hear about in the future. Now, Jilly, I know you have some thoughts on this one yourself, which is, do you think the outcomes depend on the type of adoptive parents that you had, i.e., how therapeutic they may or may not have been, or how in tune they were with you?
Well, certainly I could only speak for myself. That was certainly it for me. You know, my parents were, you know, brought up in the war, brought up by pretty Victorian parents, and didn't do affection, didn't do emotion, both professionals, lovely, nice, decent people, you know, but they weren't emotional and they weren't affectionate. So when you've got, you know, trauma, that's not best. And I think, you know, there was, I mean, this was 1962, there was no training whatsoever. So there was no talk of, you know, teaching people about attunement and how, you know, how being adopted differs. So there was no training then. So there's no blame particularly on the parents, but I know that it was hard. You know, it made me, it felt alien. I felt, you know, just adrift on my own, in my own family, because there was no affection or, you know, attunement to me. I was other than, and tried to be, forced to be the wrong word, but tried to be made to adapt to be like them, you know, in many ways. So of course, what do? You adapt. You become not your real self.
Absolutely. And yeah, that was the webinar that we had with Lara last month about how we learn to adapt. So that will be available shortly for anyone who attended. So yeah, keep an eye on the website. We've had a question in. Do you think I might add Lara in actually to discussion. So let's see if that works. Whether or not we think that adoptees tend to be more introverts or extroverts, or whether there wasn't a particular pattern that came out.
I think I might be described as an extrovert, but I think I'm actually an extroverted introvert. I think extroverting was a bit of a coping strategy, you know, show up, be funny, you know, it was part of that feeling the need to bring more to the party than just oneself, you know, be funny, be this, be that, lark about a bit, you know, act daft, make them laugh, you know. I think it was I don't think the more settled I become, the more I think that's not me. Yeah.
How about you, Lara? Do you relate to that? Oh, need to unmute.
I think that comes down to what you just said there, Jilly. It partly comes down to that sort of chameleon thing that we do in terms of adaptation. And I won't go too much into my research today, so it's not about that, but there was obvious findings around those of us who externalize and those of us who internalize our trauma. And actually, we don't necessarily just fall into one or the other camp. We might be quiet, introverted children and then later become very much extroverted. Whether that's our true selves or whether that's just an act, it's hard to know. Some of these things are trait, personality type, and other things are a trauma response and adaptation to the environment. So I think there's a mixture, and it's hard to say. On the whole, I you know, personally, I was very introverted. So I think it's hard to know. I think very much we adapt to our environments with the trauma that we're holding.
Yeah, and on that note, we did have a comment about ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences, and kind of the intersectionality with that. So although I don't think it's officially recognised yet as an ACE, as an adverse childhood experience, loss of a parent is, but not. They don't use the word adoption, but I think most of us on this call will agree that it is an ACE. But I think that what the person that commented was perhaps hinting at was that there's the intersectionality with, for example, being a minority, poverty, all these other kind of things that come into it can obviously contribute to some of these factors that Gilly's been looking at. So
and also how normalized it is, which again I can go into more later, but I mentioned saw somebody on the chat talking about, you know, the extent to which people in the family are just talking about this and making it normalized as a thing, and if that's not happening, then you're likely to go inward with your thoughts and feelings. And also, if you're the only adoptee in the family, if you're the only adoptee in your school classroom, your peer group, you know, it's really hard to sort of be open and sort of, you know, to live that outwardly. So I think that can also contribute to sort of introversion, actually, as we go forward in life.
Yeah, definitely.
We had a really good comment. Well, they're all good comments, but we had an interesting comment about coping strategies and how that's potentially a theory around why it was that as people got older, they reported lower impact. And could that be partly because as we get older, we begin to learn ways of coping and ways of managing, so that we don't actually, we kind of moving more towards that, away from survive and towards thrive, you know, in our better moments.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think I think I was certainly a lot worse when I was in my 20s, and then I was better in my 30s, better in my 40s, you know, and I'm in the best place I've ever been now. So yeah, I think that's so, yeah, definitely. You know, you find other ways of managing and coping strategies. Yeah, definitely.
Also, if it's not socially recognized before How to Be Adopted, if it's not socially recognized, we have to deny our truth in many times, and you know, our families, we're not able to speak with them about how we're feeling necessarily, or our friends, and so it's much easier. We have a story that we kind of talk to ourselves about, that we hold about, and you know, very often it's really hard to change that. So it might well be that these people have had issues, but we can sort of convince ourselves that we haven't. It's quite easy to do that.
Definitely. And with a very strong disclaimer that we're not endorsing any of this from How to Be Adopted. It might be nice if anyone has got some coping strategies that they want to share in the chat. I've been lucky enough to meet hundreds of adopted people since this began, and I'm always interested in that question. And you know, from anything from gardening to music to yoga, nature. I mean, it's the question I always ask people. You know, what is your coping strategy? I've just started cold water swimming.
Oh,
so
wow.
with your GP's agreement, give that a go if you fancy it. I'm really enjoying it. We've got a comment here from somebody here. Cranial sacral therapy and essential oils. So I've actually started the cranial as well. So we've been having some good chats on Twitter about the cranial sacral therapy, as well as Reiki and EMDR. It's been a big topic lately over on the blog. So check that out, and please, we're always interested in your feedback, in your comments, and just keep this moving. You know, we can't possibly be experts in everything out there. We're just trying, trial and error as much as everybody else here is. We've got a comment here. Oh, somebody else does the cold water swimming. Brilliant. And meditation, self-compassion and emotion-focused therapy. Okay, I haven't heard of that one. It'd be nice to know a bit more about that.
Yeah, there was an EMDR there as well.
The EMDR, cognitive analytic therapy, CAT. Okay. Journaling from Laura. Yeah, we had quite a few people asking actually for us to talk more about journaling and maybe some journaling prompts. So if that's of interest, do let us know, and we'll put something on. We'll get Laura and Jilly to put something on around that for you. Okay, let me check. I'm trying to cover everybody. We should have time. If your question hasn't been asked, but it might be too far up the chat. So if you do have a really, really pressing question, pop it back in if that's okay. Somebody was asking, Jilly, did people self-report the impact? Was there anybody else that kind of verified that? No.
All self-reported. Yeah. So heaven knows what our partners might have to say.
Oh goodness me, yeah.
Yeah.
That's for a future project.
It's one of these, when you start these things and you realize, I could have asked this, I should have asked that, I should have found out about this. you know, and it just would have been a week's worth of work for people to fill in.
I think it's a really great place, I think, to start. And I think there are certain studies, aren't there, where they ask someone that knows you well to report. So I think that's where that question was coming from.
But just thinking about the person that asked about you know, the sort of transracial adoption from groups that I've been in, and transracial adoptees I've met, you know, I think that's a whole another level that I didn't explore in this study, but I think that's, you know, very significant, and lots of other areas too that are opening up. Yeah,
it would be really great if we could pool all the different projects that have gone on and are going on now, because I know there's quite a few going on. I've seen on Twitter, if we could kind of collate that in some way to show what the different themes are that people are out there studying, and if people want to take part, then they can. Okay, so we've had a comment here from Rosie. She was asking, Jilly, did you find out how many respondents had therapy? She says here, there are so many of us struggling to access therapy due to the Department of Education restrictions, which means, in case anyone doesn't know, it means that adopted people can only attend therapy with an Ofsted regulated therapist. So this person is wondering, is anyone doing research into problems accessing therapy? Or even better, is anyone able to help us move forward on freeing adoptees up to act as independent adults?
We're trying.
we had a response here from Matthew Brazier of Ofsted. So Matthew, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Okay.
I had the Sky Man round today to check my broadband. I said, I've got the government dialing in. Well, I need to get my broadband. He said, yes. So he was really lovely. So Matthew has responded. So we at Ofsted know that it's really difficult for adults to access suitable support. We are working with the relevant government department to find a solution. We don't want regulation to limit access. And he says here, I'm optimistic that we'll have more to say very soon. And he thanks Jilly for her presentation. So thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Matthew.
If anybody is interested in learning more about the Department of Education regulations, this is just, I know we've got some people dialing in from America, so this is just for the UK. Please do get in touch, and Jilly's the one managing that from the How to Be Adopted side. So yeah, the more the merrier. We just need lots of voices on that one. So yeah, so we'll put the email back up at the end.
Right.
Okay.
So sorry, to answer that one, yeah.
Yes.
About if people have been able to access therapy. Most people had not, but they didn't say why not.
Okay.
They didn't say whether it was because they hadn't been able to find it. But I imagine there was a mixture. I'm guessing that there was a mixture of people kind of not really realizing that it was something you could have counselling for, you know, and also not being able to find it.
Yeah. On that note, we have had quite a few people commenting on whether or not they have tried to access therapy, and whether they've been lucky enough to, you know, to find something suitable. Somebody here was asking, yeah, we've had about half a dozen comments about reunion, and people were wondering what impact this had on the results, or on how people reported impact. So whether or not they had entered into reunion, how that had gone, whether that kind of wavered over time. I just want to acknowledge we've had some, you know, a breadth of comments about reunion, just to acknowledge everybody who has found it challenging and is continuing to find it challenging. Really do understand, and we are all, you know, we are all with you, and we do understand. So did that come up, Julie? I think it did come up in your some people mentioned it in the qualitative
Yes.
results. Yeah.
Some people talked about it in the feelings section, but in the data section, it wasn't something I went into because I thought that's a whole other research project in itself. It's reunion. And yes, indeed, challenging it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So the reunion thing, I guess, hopefully someone will study that again, that kind of thing in the future. So just all we can do at the moment is just share experiences, isn't it, and just help each other, I think. And it does waver, it kind of over time, definitely. I don't know, is that your experience, Lara? Because you have you've worked with a lot of adopted people, haven't you, in your...
Yeah, I think that in terms of reunion specifically, yeah. I think it really depends on, I think the biggest obstacle is the conflict within the adoptee themselves, you know, to kind of figure out why, if it's the right thing, if for them, what they're seeking. And I would encourage everyone to do that, actually, because we have to manage, as usual, our expectations around you know, what that might be like. So I think not only do we have to be kind of brave and courageous about how that might go, but figure out what we're hoping for from it as well, you know. And I think that for some people it's been a lot of closure, for some people it hasn't gone quite so well, but I think in most cases that I can think of, it's not something that people could have just sort of wanted to do and then ignored, you know. I think that's the thing. It's a very strong compulsion in most of us. Actually, it's quite innate, really, to want to figure out where we come from and what our sort of, you know, what our genetic imprint is, and what, you know, it's just part of kind of who we are. But then obviously we have that kind of processing what that means for us. And as an existential therapist, we look a lot about meaning, and everything has meaning loaded into it. So it's very individual. The journey is very individual, really. But it's huge. I think it's absolutely huge, really. So it's something to certainly mull over before diving in, I think.
Yeah. I can't imagine anybody even having the best possible outcome, just sort of sailing into it, you know, feeling very easy and relaxed about it. It's even with the best of outcomes, it's still absolutely overwhelming.
It's really huge. And one of the things, I mean, I can't speak for other people, but I know personally, one of the things that happened for me most of my life was a sort of a fantasy about my biological mother, my biological father too, but more particularly, I suppose I was more transfixed on her. I don't know, maybe I think that was around the communication that was sort of coming at me. But I had these sort of fantasies about her, and I would dream about what I thought she'd be like. And so, you know, the idea of sort of then coming to the reality of meeting that person is absolutely massive. It's probably the biggest thing that could ever happen in an adoptee's life, I think. So it's something that needs to be handled very sensitively and with a lot of thought and care. But yeah, you know, either way, sometimes it goes well, other times it doesn't, but it's still an innate desire in, you know, in the human, as far as I'm aware. And I think there's some research around that as well, actually.
Yeah,
there was a term coined, genetic bewilderment, which I came across, and there was a court hearing which found in the favour of this lady who had said that not having access to her history, her genetic and biological history, had actually contributed to her not doing so well in life. And that was actually massive, you know, in terms of her being able to acknowledge that this missing link had really impacted her in her life. So it really is huge.
I get it.
We've got a comment here saying bewilderment as a term really resonates very strongly there on the chat.
I've written that one down.
Yeah. I've got a thing where when I walk into a room, people say, "There's no need to look so scared," and I say, "No, that's just my resting face." Maybe it's always been the case. So I'm mindful of time. So our fantastic tech volunteer, who I'd really want to give huge thanks to, has just raised a hand. So I'm just checking there's nothing technical I need to know about. No. Okay. So what we'll do just a time check, is it?
Yeah.
Thank you, lovely. I will go to the results of the poll. I'll just check with Jilly if there's any final thoughts you would like to impart.
Yeah, I think I've written down a few ideas for tonight on for future research projects. You know, 'cause I think we really do need to research reunion, you know, and look at that. I think that's really interesting. And yeah, really just thank you for coming along and showing up and being prepared to listen, and all ideas really welcome, because, you know, we're here, we've all got the bit between our teeth to really want to make a difference for adoptees. So anything that you feel that would help or will be useful, do feed it in. It's our community here. You know, we're trying to be a support for everybody, and the more ideas we can build on, the better. But yeah, just great to be amongst you all, actually. Thank you.
Thanks, Jilly. Yeah, we've got lots of thank yous coming in, so appreciate those. I'm going to, I can't see if the is the poll result showing.
I'm just sharing the results now for you.
So as I said, it's not scientific. We're not going to use it for anything. We just wanted to do something a little bit interactive. So if you enjoyed that and you thought it was useful, we'll try and make it a bit more scientific next time. So Jilly, as you can see, we've had
the results are 4% for physical effects, with just 1 out of 25. Then we've got 3 people saying psychological and emotional effects at 12%, nothing under relational only, and then a high percentage at 84%, which is a combination of the above, which makes total sense to me. Just to say, I'm a volunteer today, but I'm also an adoptee, and I'm a transracial adoptee. So those people that might have been feeling like, oh, there's a lot of domestic adoptees here, don't worry, there are some people representing international adoption here as well. Cheers, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. You honestly, no, yeah, I was personally having palpitations about the text, so really grateful to our fantastic adoptee volunteer. Thank you.
Just to add, Claire, about from that response, that kind of ties in with the biopsychosocial model then, that if most people felt a combination, it's across the piece, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just an emotional response. It's not just psychological. It's somatic. It's in the body. It's, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we here tonight mirror the biopsychosocial impacts.
100%.
Yeah. So I need to do sort of any other business before we go, and a bit of housekeeping. I'm going to finish on this with the comments. So feel free to keep saying goodbye to one another, but a lovely comment here from someone. He says, lovely to hear so many of you with the same challenges I'm facing. It gives me confidence that I'm not alone. Great talk and interesting results. So thank you for that. And in terms of the housekeeping, I'm going to pop the helpline for the post-adoption centre into the chat again. So please do note that down if you feel that you would like to have a chat. It is open tomorrow. I believe it may not open until after lunch, but they do have a really good answer phone, and they always, in my experience, they always call you back. So I'm going to pop that in for you now. This is just, you know, our kind of safeguarding, because obviously things might come up for you later on this evening or maybe tomorrow. And we just want to sort of make sure you're all taken care of. So I'm going to pop that in.
Oh, something else that really occurred to me. I noticed a question popped up that said, what is reunion? So reunion is when people have gone to find their birth family and they've actually found them, and they're, you know, reunion with them. So that's what we mean by reunion, just to answer that question that came in. The kind of thing you see on, dare I say, Claire's favourite programme. What's it called again?
Long Lost Family.
Long Lost Family, that's it, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Here we go. Yeah, so we've got the contact details here. Fantastic. And somebody has asked here, yeah, about what PAC offer. So the advice line is open to anyone, and that's not restricted. But the counselling, it does depend on where you live. So just give them a ring. They're really lovely, and they'll help you kind of signpost if you do need some support. And just finally, please give us a follow. If you don't, please sign up to the email so you can keep, keep being the first to know about these kind of events. Let us know what you want to see, and just please keep in touch. And thank you so much for all your support. It's really, really appreciated. And we've been really happy and excited as we've seen all your bookings coming through. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And there will be a PDF coming of the slides and of Gilly's findings. So anyone that attended today will get that PDF. Please bear with us because we're only a small team. So that should be with you, I won't promise, but soon, next week or so. And that will also have some of the qualitative thoughts in there. So you'll hear some adoptees sharing some of their experiences and their challenges in there. So you can look forward to that. And once again, thank you very, very much. We're really, really happy that you could be here.